and welcome to the Art of Being Human. I'm going to go back and talk a little more about in terms of getting well if you're a widow, and of course it applies to other kinds of relationship backup. So if somebody has died that you're very close to, but basically I'm focusing on widowhood, but it can apply to other situations as well. In the process of grief, you forge a new reality, and the problem is you may be afraid of that new reality. It's not what you had before, it's different than you had before. And you really can't liken it to, well, I like it better, I don't like it as well. It's different. Sometimes when something is different, it can be good as well as bad. And at some point you may even get to like it. You may like your new reality. You may like the person that you've become because you're not the same person. You're the person that's without someone that you used to love, but at the same time, you haven't lost your love for that person, but that person is no longer there. And so you may be on your own. It is easier if you have good family support because you can always turn to them. You're not completely alone. You have a good family. But if you don't have a family, what do? You can create a family sometimes just by the relationships that you forge, the relationships that you have. You can be friends with people. You can nurture the people that you know. And I've said before, the danger of being a professional person, well, there are 2 or 3 dangers that Joyce Brothers talks about in her book. The one danger is the fact that you can feel completely alone. And you feel, even though that people watch you, if she was a public figure, and of course she always was, but they're not going to be there for her when she needs them. She needs one-on-one help. She needs to have person-to-person contact. And it's a fearful thing not to have that. If you're living alone and you've never married, or if you have married, it's the same kind of thing. You lose something. You feel alone. How do you get it back? How do you get a relationship back that you've lost like that? Most women who lose their husbands and become widows, they're in their late 50s, close to being 60. How do you get a relationship going to replace the person that has left you because of death? Well, you can't really do it. The options aren't very good. And even if you meet somebody and you like them, it doesn't mean that you'd want to marry them and have all of that angst to go through if they died. You know, there is a fear when a person dies that other people are going to die too. I remember when President Kennedy's wife was talking about the grief of losing her husband because he was assassinated. She started getting fears that everybody else in her life would also be assassinated, and she wouldn't have anyone left, and she'd be totally alone. Well, that's a scary thing. It wouldn't probably ever happen, and she did meet people who helped her, but it's a whole loss. It's a big hole, and you've fallen into the hole. How do you get out? And how do you get back to normal again? Well, in the process of the grief, and you forge this new reality, you begin to like the new reality because it does have some advantages. You're not tied down by anybody's illnesses. You're not tied down to anybody's busy schedule because they both had busy schedules. He was a doctor and she was a psychologist. They all had busy schedules. And so therefore, when he became ill with cancer, she dropped back on her schedule. She canceled some things. She wasn't as active as she was, but it's a career that she could get back to at any time. And she didn't drop it completely. And she hired private planes. She had the finances to do it so that they could take her, a private plane to take to her where she was supposed to be and to fly her back to the nearest airport. And he was still alive. After that, she feared she wouldn't have enough money for anything, because she had dropped back quite a bit in order to be with him in the final stages of his illness, and she felt no money. And what am I going to do? But there are widows who don't have a lot of money because their breadwinner, their husbands are gone, and they are homemakers, basically, taking care of their children, and that's it. So it's an adjustment period, but when you forge a new reality, take a look at the advantages that you have that will come over a period of time. And she wrote this quote, which I want to read. After a year and a half, I have come to realize that I am whole. As the months go by, I feel more and more together, so much so that I feel like a different woman. But she recovered. The way that she recovered was when she was writing the book that she wrote, she realized that her grief was gradually disappearing. She was crying still, but not as often. She would miss him still, but not quite as much. The missing and the episodic pangs that I've talked about, they weren't so severe. They weren't so strong. And she got better and better and better. And then she started getting her energy back. She felt like doing things again. And she did things. And, and she forged her new reality. And she went back into her profession full time. And the expression of all of the grief and what she went through that year and a half of awfulness brought her out into kind of a fresh new day. And I'm wondering if, and I know some people do this, if they have illnesses, if they're in danger of dying, if they do a lot of artwork and they do creative things and express themselves creatively, then they get rid of a lot of that angst that's within them, and then they start to improve. There was one man, and I wished I could think of his name. He was well known, and he was diagnosed with a terminal illness. And what he did, and he recovered from it, but what he did was he went home and he watched funny movies that he loved, movies that would make him laugh. Nothing somber, nothing dramatic, funny, just funny things. And he would just sit there and lay in bed, watch the movies, and laugh and laugh and laugh and laugh. And as gradually as time went by, he conquered the illness. So the illness left him. He felt better and better and better until he didn't have the symptoms of it anymore. And some people go on health kicks. My mother used to have a book. I wished I knew where it was because I'd like to read it. It was called The Grape Cure. And it was for people who were having cancer. And in those days, now my mother passed when she was 91. And that was a few years back. And so therefore, that book was written quite a few years ago, but it was called The Grape Cure. And a person who had cancer, or several people who had cancer, ate nothing but grapes, drank grape juice. Everything was grapes, grapes, grapes. And they were healed. They didn't have cancer anymore. And it was good for them. It was like their body was detoxified. And then what came along was something that called the Reams method of healing, where you flush out your system, drinking lots of water, but it's distilled water, so you don't put anything in your system except the water itself and whatever you're allowed to eat. And then they flushed out toxins, and after about 3 days, you would break out in a bad rash. But it was the toxins leaving your system, and there were people that I knew personally that were healed of cancer that way. Now, of course, they had to take vitamins, and they had to take types of foods where they would replenish what they needed, because the distilled water, when it flushed you out, it flushed out everything, the good as well as the toxins. And so you would have to replace the good with supplements. And once you have the supplements and a special diet, some of these people got healed from cancer too. So there are natural means. Now, if there are natural means of healing that work, and there are, I'm not saying they always work, but there are some natural means that are very helpful, then why not a natural type of thing to heal the mind? And in forging this new reality is a way of healing the mind, because it puts you in a different space. You're no longer in that zone where you are just grieving, and you get better and better, and then you decide that you like life again. You like the independence. You like being able to make your own decisions. You like the fact that your energy is back. You have something to live for. And there are people who make the mistake of thinking that if you're not constantly grieving, you're not honoring the loved one who died. And that's not true. No one wants to think about their relatives grieving and never stop grieving. You have to get on with life, and you have to forge this new reality. And in the end, it will bring you healing. Well, what about all of these other kinds of things that you go through? All of the trauma that you go through every day? This particular segment that I'm on now, that I've been on for the last few weeks, is how to overcome anxiety and how to overcome depression, to live a normal life without having to suffer all of that. You can have a new reality, and the new reality is the fact that you are a person, no one owns you, you can take care of yourself, you can make your own decisions, you can be a reasonable person, but you also have to forgive what seems unforgivable, just as you need to be forgiven of what seems to be unforgivable. So forgiveness is a part of the healing process. Suppose you have an accident and somebody dies as a result of the accident. How do you heal from that? Well, you can't harbor bitterness. You have to be able to just decide that you're going to heal by being forgiving and using natural methods, or whatever methods you need. You may need medical care. You may need therapy. You may need medication. Whatever you need, you use those things to help yourself heal. Now, she was still, as she describes it, she was still lonely, but not all the time. She still cried, but not all the time. She was on a campaign to help people to stop smoking. Her husband died because of smoking. 26,000 people a year, men, die, and most of it is done from smoking. It can be traced right back due to the DNA evidence and all of that. It can be traced right back to smoking. And so she joined a campaign to try to get people to stop smoking. And people who smoke marijuana, it's the same thing. It's not healthy. Now, it may take you from some symptoms, but it's not healthy to do marijuana all the time. So she's on a campaign. Now, she gives this advice: cry when you want to. Beware of pills and alcohol, because pills and alcohol aren't always the answer either. You do need to have some help. You may need to have some help being distracted from what you're dealing with. So she has a list, if I can find the right page here. She has a list of how to help, advice for the widow. Stay in charge of your life. Nobody owns you. You don't own anybody else either. You can make your own decisions. Don't let others take over your life. Remember, you are a person. You grieve individually. You come out on top individually, but you are your own person, and you have to make your own decisions. Don't let others take over your life. You are you, and you're going to have a life after this is over with. You had a life before. You'll have a life afterwards. Avoid hasty decisions. It is wise to wait for a year before you make major decisions, because before that, you're still engrossed in the grief process and you're making your decisions on the basis of your grief. But that's not good for you, and your decisions might not be decisions that you would make if you gave it more time. But I understand also there's sometimes you don't have the time. Sometimes you have to make a quick decision, so you do the best you can. And getting others to help you with your decisions is fine, as long as you don't give them a pass to take over your life. Avoid hasty decisions if you can. Plan for your future, because you're still going to have a future, and it's still going to be there. And maintain a regular schedule. There's something about the regularity of a schedule that helps you to heal. It just does. Plan ahead for anniversaries, holidays, and weekends. Those are the most difficult times. Holidays especially, you have to have a different set. You have to have a different thing to do, a set of practices that you follow so that holidays become easier to deal with. You have to really, in a sense, plan for new traditions in your life to replace the older ones. Not that you want to forget what you had, but at the same time, you have to have something new in order to last, in order to be able to live through it. Get out of the house. Don't just sit there and wallow in your grief, because that's not going to help you. Fight loneliness. You can fight loneliness, join groups, go to meetings, do whatever. I know some people that are not alcoholics, but they still attend alcoholic meetings just to meet people and to be out. They have a problem with loneliness or something else, but sometimes they go to AA meetings just to have friends, to make friends. Be good to yourself. Exercise is wonderful. Cry when you want. Beware of all kinds of pills and medications. Follow medical advice. You may need some medical help. You may need some counseling help. And just check on your progress every 3 months. If you look back every 3 months, and if you can remember what you were like before, 3 months ago, and what you're like now, you might be amazed at the progress that you've made. It may be a lot more than you think. And to help, how can people help widows? If you know of somebody that is a widow and you want to help them, put yourself in their place. How would you feel if the same thing happened to you? Avoid the impossible questions. How are you? Well, they're not good, because if they didn't have that death, they would be a lot better. So it's like an impractical question. And a person always says, oh, I'm okay. Well, they're not okay. You know, you see a friend on the street, how are you doing? Oh, I'm doing fine. And you know they're not. Better to be honest about it, but no one wants to listen to somebody else's story unless you're in a therapist's office, you know. So you have to be careful. So don't avoid questions that they really can't answer honestly. Encourage the person to talk about it, because that is a great help. That's therapeutic in itself. Let her cry. Stick with her. Most don't act as a support system for very long. If you're a widow, the people who are helping you to begin with gradually fade away. For one thing, they've got their own lives to attend to. They may not be living close. They've got their families to attend to. And the worst thing that you can do to a person who's in grief is start giving them advice. They need to get rid of their emotions. They don't need to take in somebody else's advice. It is better not to say anything at all than just to talk, thinking that it's going to help them. It doesn't help them. They can't grasp it. At that point in time, they cannot grasp a lot of information. The brain's not up for it. It's just not up for it. It's like a wounded soul. You're dealing with a wounded soul, and a person who's wounded just can't hang on to information. They have to let that go, and you have to just be there for them so they can let that go. Well, I want to kind of wrap it up because I'd like to start something else next time, so I'm going to close this off, and so we're not going to be dealing with widowhood. I think what I'm going to be doing next time is starting a new segment on how to help children who are in trouble, how to help children through their own difficulties. But I might do a special segment first on how do you know if a child is being abused? How do you suspect that there might be incest involved in this abuse? And so I want to do a special section on that first, and then go into how do you help children get through their own grief and their own difficulties. You have to remember that a child is not an adult, and they can't think like an adult, and they can't reason like an adult. Why? Because their brains aren't developed enough to do it. So therefore, you have to kind of look at things from a brain that is not well developed at that point, but they're in difficulties and they need help. So I want to get into that, and we'll probably start with handling children who are abused. How do you know for sure? What do you report? You know, all this kind of thing as a help to children. So we'll close it here. Please join me next time.